A marine designer or coastal engineering is an civil engineering structural designing work in beach, involves the planning, design, and construction of works aimed at reclaiming land from the sea, countering subsidence, protecting shorelines, facilitating navigation, and providing harbors. Of these activities, coastal reclamation may embrace large areas, whereas the others are more restricted to the immediate coastal zone. In today's terms, engineering works generally involve hard structures, such as seawalls and breakwaters, which intercept and reflect waves and currents, or soft structures, such as nourished beaches and planted vegetation, which absorb incident wave and wind energy. Ideally, coastal engineering should involve not only the provision of suitable structures but also predictions of the effect of coastal processes on, and the environmental impact of, these works. Coastal reclamation has long been practiced on a modest scale, for example, by prehistoric peoples in Asia, the Persian Gulf, and Europe who endiked intertidal slop for fish ponds and salt-tolerant crops, and built trackways across coastal marshes. They were simply managing natural sedimentation processes to their benefit. Likewise, Roman engineers reclaimed strips of coastal marsh for agriculture, and medieval monasteries were able to command the labor and resources needed to effect further reclamation. From the 13th century, the Dutch were constructing windmills equipped with paddle wheels, and later with Archimedes screws, to remove water from endiked polders. However, technical limitations generally restricted impoldering to small areas, whose fragile earthen dikes were often destroyed by storm seas, and where reclamation was aggravated by the shrinkage and cutting of exposed peat. Around 1600, with the invention of the revolving cap for windmills that enabled wind to be used from any direction, wetland reclamation on a larger scale became a practical proposition. Many lakes in North Holland, between Amsterdam and Den Helder, were reclaimed for farming before 1650. These methods were soon applied to the English Fens, a 4,000-kilometer embayment inland from the wash that had been formed late in the Flandrian transgression. Reclamation of the Fens began in earnest around 1630 and, aided by the prominent engineer, Cornelius Vermuyden, saw vast tracts drained and endiked by the 1660s. However, as in Holland, reclamation led to peat shrinkage, surface lowering, and reflooding, which remained a problem until the introduction of steam, diesel, and electric pumps. These technological advances also allowed the vision of Cornelis Lely for the reclamation of the 5,000 km Zuiderzee, flooded by medieval incursions of the North Sea, to be achieved between 1919 and 1986, producing several large polders and the present IJsselmeer and Markermeer. Like coastal reclamation, other engineering works in antiquity were modest compared to the accelerating activities of recent centuries. More than 2,000 years ago, people were building defenses against the sea and suffering the consequences of their failure. Early Egyptians, Phoenicians, Greeks, and Etruscans built rubble mound breakwaters, jetties, and seawalls, but the practical Romans were the preeminent engineers of classical times, often building concrete structures aided by cofferdams, although Strabo described how the harbor at Ephesus promoted sedimentation. In later centuries, engineered structures gave storm security to dying down Venice, bigger ports for growing exchange, and promenades and assurance for amusement. Until the 19th century, be that as it may, these ventures were for the most part little: beacons to alarm sailors, stone harbors in shielded straits, short seawalls at uncovered territories, bulkheads in estuaries, and wooden crotches to counter seashore disintegration. Then, at that point, as activities multiplied, numerous architects came to comprehend the effects of seaside measures on their constructions and the other way around. The issues of hard constructions were exemplified in a 1789 diary in which Lamblardy grumbled that harbors in Normandy had gotten stifled by a literal float of sand and shingle. Alternately, the utility of delicate designs was communicated in the Landes of southwest France, where Bremontier countered issues of rise relocation brought about by overgrazing and vegetation evacuation by planting oceanic pine. Numerous early ventures were created by military specialists since they could call all the more promptly on the assets important to configuration, develop, and fix beachfront works. This may in any case be valid, for instance, with the U.S. Armed Force Corps of Specialists, in spite of the fact that, from its actuation in 1832, the Civilian Coast Overview was additionally examining dregs infringement and designing effects on harbors. In the course of recent years, most waterfront countries have created offices to facilitate beachfront turn of events and, behind schedule, to address coming about issues. As designing innovation improved and delivers increased, from little exchanging vessels to current compartment ships and oil big haulers, harbors moved from protected estuaries to more profound waters, frequently requiring digging, recovery, and huge barriers. Accordingly was the Middle Age pool of London prevailed by huge Victorian harbours down the Thames estuary, which thusly offered approach to far-off holder transport terminals. All such changes incited impacts, as designed constructions superseded regular frameworks and huge ports. For example, Rotterdam and Los Angeles developed with meager respect for littoral float or seaside nature. Updrift development of sea walls and breakwaters usually caused downdrift disintegration issues that, regardless of further developed plans, for example, offset designs and sand bypassing, proceed with today. In comparable vein, further developing innovation has come to relieve normal risks, yet at an expense. Along these lines, after tropical storm destruction in 1900, the port of Galveston, Texas, was given security by raising the land by 3 meters with fill dug from the inlet and giving a seawall that became 15 kilometers long. The development of coastline occasions in the 19th century animated both designing tasks and human consciousness of seaside the executive's issues. Coasts as sporting scenes had drawn in the metropolitan affluent in the 18th century, quite from London to Brighton, and from Philadelphia to Cape May, yet the rail route craziness after 1840 started a lot bigger convergence of individuals. The railroad arrived at Brighton from London in 1841, Blackpool from Lancashire factory towns in 1846, and Atlantic City from Camden in 1854. For the prospering metropolitan social orders of Northern Europe and North America, this flood crested during the 20th century, worked with by the coming of vehicles, engine mentors, and occasions with pay. From that point onward, modest air travel carried more noteworthy quantities of individuals to far-off coasts, eminently from Northern Europe to Mediterranean and Persian Bay shores, which thus sired further administration issues. Rotting ocean-side hotels somewhere else regularly made due as sanctuaries for retirement, second homes, training, and light industry. In more created nations, the waterfront diversion blast somewhere in the range of 1840 and 1960 was met by a plenty of designing works, quite in Northwest Europe. Harbors were augmented for joy vessels. Docks, promenades, and seawalls were stretched. Southend Dock, in the macrotidal Thames estuary, in the end became 2,158 meters long. Seashores supported via seawalls and promenades experienced disintegration. Reflected waves, however, were denied renewal from once in the past dissolving precipices, for instance, by 16 kilometers of Bluff Foot Promenade at Bournemouth, Dorset. Constructions were normally worked with insufficient respect to recorded disintegration, strikingly along the 200-kilometer New Jersey shore, where disintegration was credited at first to subsidence as opposed to storms. As sporting sailing expanded, wetlands were dug for marinas, remarkably in Southern California, and harbor doorways required longer breakwaters.